The class today, we're still talking about traveling and combining prayers, but there's another concept that I wanted you to know about, and that is the concept of Jami. So, what is the difference between Qasr and Jami? And this is what we'll be focusing on today, but I want to do a short review from our previous class of October the 22nd. So, what do we do if we are traveling and we are going to reach our home within the window of the Salah? The concept of being a Musafir is not solely based on distance, but also the intention and circumstances of the traveler. It's relative and doesn't require consultation with a faqih, an Islamic jurist. Two people making the same journey might have different traveling statuses or Musafir traveling or statuses based on culture and habit. So we talked about if it's your everyday routine and you live in New Jersey and you take a plane to New York or a helicopter to New York, and this is your everyday routine, it's not a hardship for you. You're not packing a bag. Whereas someone might be coming in, but they're working and something strenuous, a difficult day, they may consider themselves as a Musafir, as a traveler. Qasr, shortening of prayers during travel, is considered mustahab, recommended, not obligatory. Praying full 4 rak'ahs as 2 rak'ah is a concession that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. But when you are a musafir, just to review, you are rewarded for shortening the prayer and not for praying the 4 rak'ah. So Qasr should begin when you leave the city or the area of your residence. We talked about this and how this has been measured historically and how very complicated it is. If you're going to reach home within the time window of the Salah, you have the option to pray it at home, pray it at home instead of on the road. But obviously, if you pray it at home, you would pray no longer as a Musafir. But if you stopped on the road, even if you were 15 minutes from your house and you're still traveling, the scholars say that you could actually shorten it. So there is no fixed limit on how long one can perform Qasr while traveling. It depends on the circumstances, and there are different opinions among scholars. So we talked about military situations, we talked about training situations at work. The Hanafi school of thought suggests a 15-day limit for Qasr. Ibn Taymiyyah and others challenged the fixed limits, emphasizing a more flexible approach based on the traveler's circumstances and common sense. So if you're living out of a suitcase and not settling down, you consider yourself a musafir, is sort of a general rule of thumb that I use, even if your stay is longer than the traditional limits. You're living out of a suitcase, you are traveling. Overall, the text that we reviewed and looked at emphasizes flexibility in determining the musafir status and encourages using reason and common sense while considering the circumstances of traveling. We even talked about back in the 80s and the 90s when Saudi Arabia were sending a lot of their scholars and they were building masjids and they were sort of propagating this very Wahhabi Salafi movement. Some of those scholars wanted to know, they knew they were going to go back to Saudi Arabia eventually. They were just here for a term appointed. That some scholars said, yes, you consider yourself a traveler. And then we looked at the spirit of it and we said, many of the scholars said, well, if you are getting a car and you're actually settling in a place and you're, going to the masjid and you're part of a community, and remember, we said you have a choice. We need to respect people's differences of choice in these cases. The material also mentioned the need to address the issue of Jami, which is combining prayers. So we talked about Qasr, but we did not talk about Jami. So let's talk about Jami quickly, which means you combine Dhuhr and Asr and you combine Maghrib and Isha. There is no permutation of Jami. You cannot do Jami with Fajr or Asr and Maghrib. The issue of Jami is not allowed by the Hanafis for travel. And remember, this is why I've said to you, my beloved students, I want you to understand fiqh and to know its role, but I also want you to recognize when fiqh is according to Allah's Quran and the Sunnah versus what someone has said or surmised based on scholarly consensus, which is called ijma'. And what I would like to do, and I may need a reminder of this, is I did may soon send out a vocabulary or a glossary for this class. I want to update that so you will know these terms, and when you hear people who are usually typically going to be born into a Muslim family using these words and saying these things, you will be familiar with where they got it from. You will understand the spirit in which they are speaking. You will actually probably know more about it than they do just based on these few classes that you've had. So again, this issue of Jami, which I'm going to talk to you about, is not allowed by the Hanafis for travel. And what I wanted to share with you just briefly is there's a book called Bidayat al-Mujtahid, and it is the Hanafi book written by Ibn Rushd called The Distinguished Jurist Primer. And it's in 2 volumes, and I'm actually going to hold it up just so you can see how thick it is. And what I wanted to show you, interestingly enough, is that in the Distinguished Jurist Primer, the book of Salah begins on page 96 and continues all the way to page, give me a minute, I actually intended to look this up. To page 258. So from page 96 to 258, that's 160 pages, just on details of prayer. And so when it comes to Jami, I just want to sort of let you experience sort of getting your hands on in this a little bit. Jami is combining prayers. 3 issues are related to the topic of combining prayers. First, it is permissibility. Second, the manner of combining prayers. Third, things permissible in combining. And so I've given you along the way some examples. Now, just on that issue alone, which just to help you sort of understand the codification of jurisprudence or law, in this case, Islamic law, 2.3.4.2, section 2, combining prayers. 2.3.4.2.1, the permissibility of combining prayers. And then the next session is on the methodology of the calls. And so this will be an interesting sort of segue, and just hang on to your seat. I know there are a lot of terms and everything, but hopefully one of the things that this class will also do is really help us to appreciate the links that our scholars, our ulama, our alims go to in order to try to make life easy for us. And yet, the way I see it, it's so very complicated. At the same time, the intention should always be to make it easy for the ummah. So, again, the Hanafis and a large portion of the masajid in the United States, actually in North America, are following Hanafi madhab. And particularly the Indo-Pak world, and you can actually Google this, what parts of the world follow Hanafi, what parts follow Shafi, what follows Maliki. And so in North Africa, you find Malikis, you don't find a whole lot of Malikis around as much as you do the Hanafi and the Shafi. My teacher was a Shafi, but many of my teachers were Hanafi, but my main teacher was a Shafi. And so the Hanafi ummah or ulama only allow this Jami that I'm talking about. And what I want you to sort of get, and I hope you can help me if the words don't work for you. We're talking about curtailing the prayer versus combining. And I thought this was the best English word that I could come up with for you. So the Hanafi ulama only allow this Jami, this combining, in Hajj and Arafat. If you just hang with me, you'll get the greater understanding as I move through this lecture. For them, Jami is something the pilgrims do in Arafat, not even in Mina. And they have their ways of looking at those ideas, of course. They have their ways that they came up with their fatwa or their ruling. And there are at least, again, you're going to see very similar to the other classes I've taught on this, 10 ahadith that the Prophet ﷺ prayed Jami in traveling. And there are at least 10 in Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, and it is very explicit. Nonetheless, we respect the madhabs, and so the Hanafis, one of them said this is Jami al-Suri, or apparent combining in the terminology of the jurists or the fuqaha. So the method of performing 2 obligatory fard prayers in one time is known as Jami al-Haqiqi, real combining. So now, remember, this is not shortening the prayers as a traveler. This is combining prayers. But what you're going to notice is these are circumstances where we combine the prayers, but we pray all the rak'ah, all the units. We don't shorten them. The method of performing 2 obligatory fard prayers in one prayer time is known as Jami al-Haqiqi, or real combining. For example, I'm going to give an example of how this would work. Asr comes in, and we're just making this up, at 4 p.m. So Jami al-Suri means you pray Dhuhr at, say, well, we're going to say 3:50 if you pray 10 minutes, 3:55 if you pray 5 minutes. And just as you finish, you look at your watch and it's exactly 4 o'clock. You salam out and you stand up and you pray Asr. That would be a form of combining 2 4 rak'ah prayers, 2 fard prayers, so to speak. And so this is how most of the Hanafi scholars interpret this. And they actually say, well, this is more difficult, which it is, than the Qasr itself, because I'm going to literally be praying just back to back. I'm going to give you the circumstances in a minute. And so this is like you're putting an extra barrier, so to speak. According to their paradigm, there is no such thing as Jami for the Musafir. It doesn't work. So this doesn't apply to the traveler, what I'm about to speak about. And this, by the way, is classical Hanafiism. And yet, I know many Hanafis who now do Jami, and they say that there are just too many pieces of evidence that are too strong to not do Jami. So despite the fact that classical Hanafis did not do this, and you'll understand it more as I give you 3 examples, we see here that many of the modern day Hanafi scholars have changed their opinion. And I'll give you, there are other, smoking, for example, was originally considered by the majority of scholars, when I became a Muslim 36 years ago, as makruh, distasteful, but not haram. When the scholars learned that there were 3,000 chemicals in tobacco, put in tobacco for people to smoke, they revised their fatwas and said it's haram. I don't believe you can find a scholar today that will say that smoking is just makruh, that it's distasteful. They will actually say that it's haram because we have more information. So what we now have is a current modern Hanafi group of scholars following this. But the standard fatwa that is given in the Hanafi school is that Jami is something that the Musafir is allowed to do, which is really interesting. There are 3 madhabs. The other 3 madhabs do allow Jami for multiple reasons. I'm going to give those to you. For Safar, travel one may perform Jami. for a type of sickness or ailment that affects your ability to perform salah on time. And I'll give an example. The hadith of Hamad ibn Dajjaj, she was a lady that constantly bled. And the Arabic word istahada, it's not pain. In other words, it's a medical issue. It's not just normal menstrual cycles. The woman had a medical issue where she continuously bled. So our Prophet ﷺ told her to do jami, to combine the prayers, not to shorten them, hear me now, but to combine them. Another example of this, and this is why it is so important. Many men who have prostate cancer, a high percentage of them end up incontinent. They will either have to wear a leg bag, or they'll have to wear pads, some kind of catheter sometimes. So another example, and it can also be for women with prolapsed uteruses, if they have a medical condition that causes difficulty in maintaining their ablution, I'm going to give you the proofs for this, they would have permission to pray jami. And actually, I had forgotten this until I started going over this to teach you this class. So incontinence or even a high fever. So somebody has a tremendous high fever where they cannot concentrate. It's that kind of fever that almost makes you befogged. This concession is for accommodating an illness that affects normal self-care duties, not a little hand cut. Oh, I just got a paper cut in the office, or I got that staple stuck me and I had a little, no, this is for, I'm going to use the word acute. That might not be the best word, but for acute medical conditions. It has to be something that would affect your wudu. The majority position is that you may perform jami of those salawats. If you are jami and musafir at the same time, one would do jami and qasr. But if you are sick at home, you will do jami of those salawats. And of course, if you are jami and musafir, you do jami and qasr. If you are sick and at home, you will perform jami without qasr. You wouldn't shorten them. You would pray 4 and 4. Okay, everybody got me there, I hope. Another example is actually constant regurgitation or diarrhea, which makes a person najis. It makes a person be considered unclean, obviously. One becomes soiled so quickly, one doesn't know when the next bout will come. So you would combine Dhuhr and Asr, or Maghrib and Isha, but you would not shorten them. So you would pray 4 for Dhuhr and 4 for Asr and combine them. And then you would pray the 3 for Maghrib and the 4 for Isha, fully, and that is combining but not shortening. One can combine the prayers, but must pray the full 4 raka'ah as you are not traveling, you are home. If you were traveling, then you would be able to combine and shorten. So hopefully that makes sense to you. Another place, a third example of where this is explicitly allowed in the ahadith, is in the masjid when there are weather conditions such as snow or rain, to the extent that the conditions would be too dangerous for people to drive back to the masjid for the next prayer. And so let me give you some real modern day examples. For those of you who lived in Buffalo, New York, or up in places where they have blizzards and people are killed every year and get stuck in their car, this would be a primary example. Now, I have never seen this implemented, but it's sad because we need to revive these sunnahs and so that people know that this is available. This is a concession that Allah has made. So let me give you an example. So we go to the masjid, the believers are praying Dhuhr. And all of a sudden, the national broadcasting system says this is an emergency alert. severe blizzard is coming our way. Please do not leave your homes. Please go to a place of safety. So what would happen is they would pray Asr. So the believers would get the word for praying Asr in the masjid. So they would pray the Dhuhr. Remember, we're at Dhuhr. And then the Imam would say, well, the weather conditions are so dangerous for you to come back to the masjid. We're going to implement the concession of Jami, and we're going to pray Asr. And my heart is so moved because we need to understand the mercy and the kindness and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has tried to make this easy for us, and we are the ones that complicate it. So instead of them coming back to pray Asr, they would, and not getting the reward for praying in the masjid, we would apply. And the same would apply for Maghrib. You come to the masjid to pray Maghrib, and all of a sudden there's a tornado warning, there's torrential rains, it's not safe to drive. The Imam would say, we're going to do Jami, and we're going to pray Isha. The Ahadith record several times when the Prophet ﷺ did this. Contextually, we must understand that in that era, rain made for muddy conditions, and often the roofs would collapse. So historically, if you read the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, there are a number of occasions when the way they made their roofs, they were like thatch roofs, but not as, I don't know if you're familiar with the thatch roofs of South Africa, not quite as intricate. They were laid branches of palm trees across a structure, and that would, because in the desert they have already had rain, that would be their roof. So in the time of heavy rains, the mud would actually cause the roofs to cave. So just to sort of give you some context, so rain made for muddy conditions and the collapse of their thatch roofs. Imagine trying to ride a camel or a horse in a hurricane. It's going to spook the horse too. So if you know anything about horses, and I know a little bit, that would spook the horse. Even in our times, if there is a blizzard, we don't want to put people in danger. We're not talking about, again, a drizzling rain, where you don't even have to hardly turn on your windshield wipers. We're talking about situations, well, perhaps, we're talking about situations that could perhaps be life-threatening. And also just using common sense where difficulty and safety is compromised. And this again speaks to the value of life in Islam, the sanctity of life being compared to the Kaaba, being compared to the holy month, and it is generally speaking, based on most jurists up to the Imam, to do this. And I actually think if a convert or a revert went up to the Imam and said, why don't we do Jami? There's a tornado. I wouldn't be surprised if the Imam and the people would say you're a lunatic or a heretic or something, because there's so much ignorance in the world about fiqh. So for these three reasons, Jami is allowed that I've given you. One very important point that I want to make today, or make here, is that Jami is allowed, but it is the mustahab thing to do. Qasr is mustahab by unanimous consensus. That's the shortening. But Jami is not mustahab. In other words, Jami is called khilaf or ullah. Even in the other madhabs, Jami is not the default. So to not do Jami, you will still be rewarded. The default is to perform Qasr, not Jami. So just understanding, hopefully this is making sense to you. So when we are traveling, we make the default to perform Jami, and the default is that we perform Qasr, not Jami. One prays every salah in its time. So you're going to understand also, while I'm explaining this in a few minutes. Ibn Taymiyyah mentions Jami is not from the sunnah of traveling. It's not about the traveler. That's really not the context here. Unlike Qasr. Rather, Jami is done when there is a need to do so, regardless of whether one is traveling or not. Therefore, if the traveler needs to perform Jami, they may do so. So this is the example. So I'm on my camel and I'm on my way to California, 3,000 miles or something. However, if I'm in an awkward, inconvenient situation, which would be with trucks coming by me 70 and 80 miles an hour, and I'm on the side of 95 on a camel or a horse, so then I can perform Jami. Okay. However, Ibn Taymiyyah says that for the one who stops in the village or city for a few days, then his ruling becomes the ruling of the mukim, remember the resident, not for Qasr, but for Jami, so they will pray 2 raka'ah dhuhr and Asr in its time. In contrast to what the majority of scholars think, Ibn Al-Qayyim says that Jami is not a recommended sunnah. So here again, we have these things, we have different scholarly opinions, and that's what they are. They're not from the Quran and they're not from the Sunnah, and we don't worship our scholars. In contrast to what the majority of scholars think, so it's not just our generation. Ibn Qayyim also says that the majority of musafir, travelers, get lazy and think they should just perform Jami. So we just join everything and shorten everything. And we just make it real easy. So rather, Jami is the exception. It is the exception and not the rule, regardless of whether one is traveling or not. One should pray Salat at its time. This is the default ruling for a Muslim. Remember that the first day that the first thing you're going to be asked about on the day of judgment is your prayers. So understandably, when we are traveling, here we are on the side of the road, and we don't want to stop again. We are allowed to pray and join those prayers, okay? But once you get to the next city, once you are there temporarily, the default now becomes you are traveling, you are musafir, and you are not sinful for doing Jami. But it is khilaf al-ula, it is considered makruh. So it is always distasteful. I deem by Allah I'm saying this correctly. I can't think of an exception. It is always distasteful not to take advantage of the concessions that Allah Azza wa Jal has offered you. Now, we did give you the exception about the opportunity to pray the 4 raka'ah. If you're in the masjid following an imam, you have either one. And we talked about honoring what is clear in the Sunnah and the Quran. So we get rewarded for performing prayers in their windows of time. Unlike Qasr, one gets a reward for performing Qasr, but for Jami, one doesn't get a reward. You get actually the opposite of that. Another point before I go back is that there is a common fatwa that I have been asked about a few times from people who like Sheikh Google and Sheikh Chrome and all these other sheikhs out there that are on the World Wide Web of fusion. But anyway, I want to make, there is a common fatwa that I have been asked about. It is propagated, and I'm very hesitant actually to even say it, because what I notice is that sometimes if you give students a concession, it's like you give them an inch, they want to take a mile. We want to please Allah, and this is why we want to have balance in our understanding of Islamic jurisprudence, but we also don't want to become lackadaisical in our worship. All right. So because people say it, and it is what we can find on Islamic websites and whatnot, that one can do jami for no reason. And they quote a hadith that is found in Sunan al-Tirmidhi. It is authentic that our Prophet one day combined, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, during Dhuhr and Asr, and then between Maghrib and Isha, and the scholar says there was no safar, there was no traveling or rain, nothing was going on, and he did this, and he said, I want to make things easy for my ummah. I did not want to bring hardship on my ummah. So this hadith is in Tirmidhi, and the Prophet did jami without any reason in this one specific instance. And he explained why. This hadith is found in Tirmidhi. Al-Tirmidhi himself says, in my entire book, every hadith I mention, you will find ulama that have accepted it, except for 3 hadith, ahadith. He says it. 3 hadith, I don't know any alim that accepted it and practiced this. And this is before Tirmidhi. This is not a fatwa that was known before Tirmidhi. And so here you see, you get something brought forth in an era or a generation that needs to be reviewed again in the next century, perhaps, because conditions are different. He mentions this one as well accepted, meaning the fiqh ruling that practiced this hadith. Nonetheless, some ulama throughout history, after a Tirmidhi, said this hadith is clear, and so they said that once in a while, if you need to, you may perform jami. Now, how confusing is that? And how easy would it be to take advantage of that? So again, I was very hesitant to open this door. And again, I'm going to reiterate why it is so safe that many people do stick to the vast majority of scholars and what they say. We're not talking about someone who has an excuse. You know, and this is real. This happened with me. I had people coming to me that are doctors, and they're going to be performing an 8-hour heart surgery. And there are numerous kinds of heart surgeries where the doctor cannot leave that patient for like 8 hours. And they have to be there the entire time, as does the patient. The patient can't sort of be rolled out of surgery and brought back to life to pray their prayer, and then let's go back and, you know, let's subject you to a whole bunch of infections and then bring you back into the surgery theater. No. Many surgeons who have these long procedures, they don't get to stop and eat during them. So if the doctor were to leave, a person would die. And I'm going to come back to why I'm giving you this as well. And look at the context. This is the context of death. And what do we know? That, you know, you don't need a fatwa in the situation of life and death. I mean, this is, you know, to save a life is like saving 9 billion people, all of humanity. To take a life is like to take one life is like taking 9 billion people. This is the sanctity of life. So here again, it's why we must so respect the scholars, because they have to really think of every possible exception to the rule. Because if you throw out a fatwa and you don't do that, look at how many people you can misguide. So I really do hope, and I ask Allah that this class has opened your eyes and is really helping you to understand. You know, let's say, for example, that we have a shopaholic in the family, and they hear me do this. They say, "Oh, well, the next time I go to Mala Malini, I'm going to do jami." Then it becomes a joke. It becomes a mockery. That's not for the sake of Allah. That's for the sake that I can exercise my nafs more and do a little more retail therapy than probably what spiritual therapy would call for. Let's say that it's time for the World Cup or I forget what it's called, the Super Bowl, I think is what the big popular thing is in America. As all of you know, I'm not very sports oriented. So all of a sudden they're going to watch the football game. So I don't want to miss it. So I'm going to do jamming. And so this is why I'm so reluctant to even share this. I understand that if there is a surgery or something, a qiyas. Now, qiyas, I don't think I've used before. It is a deductive analogy where the teachings of hadith are compared and contrasted with the teachings of the Quran to apply a known injunction, which is called a nath, to a new circumstance and create a new injunction. So qiyas is often used by the modern day scholars of their time to help people adjust to new situations. We have a sandstorm or heavy rainfall is a circumstances, but to open this door and say, if life is a little awkward, you can do this, we would not. We have to pray our prayers in the proper windows of time. And I just wanted to talk about one more thing in closing that I think is very, very important. The fact that I mentioned Queen Elizabeth I must have irritated someone, and they felt that I was like making fun of the scholars. And I want to promise you that was not my intention at all. I seek refuge with Allah. I never want to do this. I fear Allah. I was simply trying to teach you where these measures come from. You remember we talked about the farsakh and the milli and the roar, I think is the other one. One of my greatest mentors in life told me that anytime someone criticizes you, before you become defensive, and this is, I think, very difficult for me as a convert, because oftentimes people who were born into Islam or that speak Arabic have approached me as sort of superior. But he said that anytime someone criticizes you, before you get defensive, think that maybe there is an element of truth, and then understand the psychology of the critic. And I think this is the good nasiha for all of us. In this case, I don't think I have done anything wrong. By telling you a factual, correct statement that the person or the entity or the group that defined the mile, the way that we understand it, was according to Queen Elizabeth I in that era. She got a group together and they passed the law. Just to prove this point, and by the way, there is this issue of how many miles. As we said, there are so many opinions. So we had Barud, I think I didn't say it right, for Barud, Farsakh, and Midis. And I wanted to explain the history of how we came to the 48 mile. And so I just wanted to give a little, just in conclusion today, just a few words. Imam al-Hajjawi, who died in 968 after the Hijrah, which would be 1561 in the Common Era, he was the author of a celebrated Hanbali fiqh text. And this is what he said. Now, we're looking at 1561. He said a mile is 12,000 steps. Every step is 6,000 dirar. Every dirar is 24 fingers in length, and widthwise, each finger is 6 grains of barley. If you laid them side by side, each grain of barley is the size of 6 hairs from a workhorse called a bildun. I think it's the right way to pronounce that. And this is how he defined it, not Queen Elizabeth I. This is how he defined it. Some modern people have tried to calculate this. And imagine if I ask each of you to calculate this. All of our hands are different. Some of us have tiny fingers. Some of us have big, meaty fingers. Some of us have girth in our fingers. Some of us have bony fingers. So some modern people have tried to calculate this and have gotten varying numbers from 80 to 160, because what is the raw and what is a finger's length? And the variation is just so vast. So Ibn Rafa'i, who was actually the person who was put in charge in 7th century Cairo of marketplace measurements, wrote a chronicle, a book of weights and measurements in the history of Islam. He wrote in his book, our scholars have differed about how much a mile is. The Hanafi said it is 4,000 dirar. Some of the Maliki, Ibn Abdullah, said that it is 3,500, and Ibn Habib said it is 2,000, and Al-Suki said, the famous position, the Malikis, is that it's 2,000, and some have said 3,500. The Shafis have said the mile is 4,000 steps. The Hanafi said the mile is 6,000 dirar, and this is how they define it. So again, this is why we can see that not even within this classic book is it devoid of derivation. If you feel that when you are driving your car and when you cross 48 miles on your odometer, if you think you're a musafir then, or traveler, then who said that? This is the point I'm trying to make. Did the Prophet ﷺ say this? Did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say this? Or was this something that was derived in a scholarly manner? Ibn Qadaba, Suki, and Nawawi, and many of the scholars have strived to teach us how they got to the 48 miles. The reason I wanted to present this topic and the reason I chose this topic was that it was a non-emotional one. And I felt it's not one that's going to get people emotionally charged. I know how hard it is to understand this stuff, folks. And so I wanted to get something that would take us away from the emotions enough that we'd be able to process it. At the end of the day, who cares if you follow the 48-mile position? Really and truly, is it a life or death situation? Is it life-threatening? It's not. But now, there are topics, and this is one of the reasons why I respected my teacher so profoundly, is because he believed that we should approach fiqh al-aqliyat, the fiqh minorities, and that we should consistently be examining our fiqh in light of the times that we live. The issues that concern me for the future, and I want to mention this, are topics like gender issues and roles, societal issues, democracy, living in a secular state. These are highly charged issues. These are issues that get people emotionally charged. And people think they should know the haqq, they should know the truth, they should know the right, the reality immediately. And I purposely wanted to demonstrate how we do respect our ulama immensely, and at the same time recognize that they are fallible human beings. Had I been alive 1,000 years ago, it would be the same thing. Just because many ulama said 48 miles doesn't make it the religion of Allah. And this is really what I want you to take from this. It doesn't mean a free-for-all. I respect the ones who stick with the madhab, especially when I look at what was happening in the late 80s and 90s, when this trend arose. And as I shared before in the class, when Saudi were sending these young men to America and building these masjids, and they were teaching from the Arabic culture. That's what they knew. They were not delivering Islam in light of, or in the context of the American world. And they opened the door for free-for-all, and then this free-for-all led to a lot of chaos, splintering, and deviation in the Ummah. This was their intention, not to create the space for that. Some have even said that the results of this are radicalism and fundamentalism. Even though that is not fully true, there is perhaps an element of truth, because in the end, those movements do stem from the larger movements that did not open this door. But I don't think it's the main reason. But if they see what happened when they opened the door of ijtihad, physical or mental efforts toward independent reasoning, which we look at in terms of making the law for Muslims to practice, this has resulted in a new generation coming, and it is human nature that for every action there is an equal or opposite reaction. A new generation, much more nuanced and educated than the 80s and 90s generation. They are saying we are going to stick with it and not open this door at all. But now we have these beautiful, our first American scholar that graduated from Al-Azhar, I.S.L.A.M, was Sheikh Yasser Fahmy. And I think Shuaib Webb is one. Please don't hold me to that, but I do know that they both attended Al-Azhar. I do know that Shuaib Webb, may Allah bless him, is actually Hafiz of Quran, memorized the entire Quran. I'm not sure if that's the case for Sheikh Yasser Fahmy, but these are scholars that have gone there. They grew up in America. Sheikh Yasser Fahmy was in the financial world, if I remember correctly. And now he is a scholar for us. And he and Shuaib Webb, they are able to deliver these fatwas. These is the caliber of people. So this is why we now can review this. We don't have to be stuck in the way that imams of the 80s and the 90s were doing this. So while I appreciate the sentiment, if we want Islam to flourish, for the more difficult questions, as I said again, safar is no big deal. Traveling, it's not going to make us or break us spiritually. If you want to stick to the 48, stick to the 48. Alhamdulillah, I purposely went into more than 2 hours of lecturing to demonstrate the evolution of fiqh, and in this case, an effort to try to help you understand the arduous work put into fiqh by scholars so that we would have an idea. Does that mean that all of us in this class are going to do this? No. My suggestion to all of you is that you choose the alama or the ulama that you think is most suited to you. You have to. That is your ijtihad, that is your spiritual struggle, and there are plenty of ulama who have track record, and I look up to a group of ulama across the world, and especially the councils of fiqh. And by the way, my teacher was the president of IIIT and many fiqh councils. And I wanted to take a moment to remind myself and you, if I could, the IIIT was the international, let's see if I can, the International Institute of Islamic Thought. My teacher was one of the founders of that in Herndon, Virginia. And there's tremendous scholarship coming up now. So let me come back with respect to them. I am sympathetic to that strand of fiqh, which is respectful of the madhabs, but not if they are blindly following. When you get to the point that you're stuck and you're defending what somebody said rather than what Allah and His Messenger said, that is a deviation. But in some issues, especially controversial, difficult issues of our time as a society to follow, we must rethink things, and this is where fiqh councils come in so handy. Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, who was the chairman of the International Union of Muslim Scholars, is a great example. He died in September 2022 at 96 years of age. Sheikh Mohammed al-Hassan al-Didu, is a Mauritanian Muslim scholar, author, writer, poet, and president of the Ulama Information Center and the president of Abdullah ibn Yassin University. He is also head of the country's Center for Development of Scholars. In 2014, he was the vice president of the International Union of Muslim Scholars, and he is still a member of it. So we do have reputable scholars that are on this thread that we really need to keep scholarship alive. These scholars approach the madhabs with respect, but we fine-tune issues in order to accommodate people in different cultures and different societies. These are some scholars and groups that I look up to, celebrate mercy. Overall, the fatwas I give you generally will come from that school of modern Islamic thought, and I respect that some are uncomfortable with this approach and that they want to stick completely to old rulings, and that's fine. Their intention is to please Allah, alhamdulillah. Allah is not going to punish them. But I firmly believe that if we want our children and grandchildren to truly practice Islam and flourish, we are going to have to rethink some of our issues. And we must be open to this, not on suffer, it's not a big issue, but it served to give you a case study. And with that, we are done with traveling. I want us to come back home now. We have 10 days left in Rabi al-Thani, the fourth month of the Islamic calendar, referred to as the second spring. Rabi means gentle wind. In the month of Rabi al-Akhir, the first year of the Hijrah, which is what we will be coming into, the 4 rak'ah prayer was obligated at home. Remember, because the early Muslims were so persecuted that they were not allowed to pray in the public, they had to pray. And I thought it was interesting to bring this piece, because we were talking about combining prayers. And this is the beauty of the richness of our faith. How this is just the very tip of the iceberg. I am so ignorant. I just tried my best to give you a taste of this, and hopefully to inspire you to be open and not stuck. Because this is what happens to many rebirths. They just do whatever everybody tells them, and they're stuck in Pakistan. Meanwhile, they're living in America. It's just an example. So in the month of Rabi al-Akhir, the first year of the Hijrah, the 4 rak'ah prayer was obligatory. It was obligated to do at home. The prayer was obligatory for 2 rak'ahs when traveling and at home. So the traveler prayer was approved, and 2 rak'ah were added to the home prayer. So this is how beautiful it is when you look at how Allah ties things into every single Islamic aspect, like the calendar ties into this very subject of faith. As it was proven on the authority of the mother of the believers, Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, the daughter of Abu Bakr al-Siddiq, may Allah be pleased with her, him, narrated by Imam al-Bukhari and Muslim in their Sahihs. Next week, inshallah, we will examine Imam Ghazali's writings about human sovereignty, power and jurisdiction and rulership of self and nations, and the sovereignty of Allah Azza wa Jal. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Consider you, O Allah, and praise be to you as you praise yourself. I bear witness that there is no deity except you, and I seek your forgiveness and I repent to you. So I end by saying that if I said anything wrong, it is from my ignorance and my ego. If I said anything right, all the glory and all the praise is due to Allah. I ask you to forgive me for going 6 minutes over, but I really wanted to wrap this up, and I also wanted to add this beautiful piece as to how the Islamic month ties into this.